All right, students, so let's look at Lesson 8, Configuring Internet Explorer. Now, before we do this, the question becomes, remember, we're not dealing with just configuring Internet Explorer for a single client. We're talking about configuring it in a corporate environment. What does it mean to configure Internet Explorer? Well, first of all, it means saving the company lost productivity time. So a little dated article, you might want to look it up. Here's the link. 178 billion in employee productivity lost annually due to internet misuse. So, dated article, referencing 2005, but you get the idea. 5.9 hours per week surfing the internet for non-work related issues. Time spent what they call cyber lacking. Of the categories, 11 million websites divided into 9 categories. Here's where people are spending their time. News, 81%, personal email, 61%, online banking, travel, shopping, you name it. And the fact is they're doing it on your corporate network. So who becomes responsible? Well, certainly the CEO doesn't know how to secure and keep people from doing things on Internet Explorer that they shouldn't. So let's take a look at what we can do. So, first of all, administering or configuring Internet Explorer, we have a ton of great features. I'll do a sideline video. Within group policy, you can also just simply Google group policy in Internet Explorer. You'll find some great features. So we're talking Windows 10 here because it was part of 8. But certainly 11 is out. You'll find the same similarities. You'll launch it from the desktop. Remember, we got a new interface that we're dealing with, and here's the bad boy that we need to administer, Internet Explorer. So the challenge becomes, first of all, as users learn to be more savvy with their computers, they learn how to go in and delete their browsing history if you allow them to. So suddenly they're doing all this stuff they know they shouldn't do. They delete the browser history. There's no real record of it. Or they're going in and using private browsing. All things we want to consider turning off. Now, as we do these, it's really important to understand we can't just do this without informing employees. There is usually a thing in place called a digital agreement or an acceptable use policy that users have to sign. And this kind of stuff needs to be in the policy. We actually need to tell users, you can't do this stuff. And then the next step is keeping them from doing it. So one of the things, earlier versions of Internet Explorer satisfies most users' needs with no adjustment. As we know, as modern programming and HTML5 come into play, we have issues with older compatibility, so compatibility of older websites, that were programmed using old technology. So accommodate older pages. We have Compatibility View. You may have used this view. In Select Tools Compatibility View, you can set it up, configure it if you want users to have access to it. Workstations on Active Directory. Again, group policy. So there we see the idea of configuring Compatibility View and group policy. Now, the indicator, of course, if you've seen this, Compatibility View icon. So we know when we're viewing an old site, okay? And what we can do is just simply add the URL for the site that needs to be opened in Compatibility View. And it then, next time we go to that URL, will. So if you notice here, Compatibility View, we can turn on Internet Explorer 7 standards mode. Turn off Compatibility View if we don't want it on. Go as far as to take the button away so that users can't use Compatibility View. So policy settings, here they are. We just saw them on the previous screen. You can pause this and look at this. Quirk mode, sites, so, etc. The other thing is managing add-ons. So as you know, you had to install an ActiveX control, an add-on per se, when you started running the MOAC labs. Well, in that inherently can come security risks of knowing whether or not, those add-ons are acceptable, right? So, supported, we get the toolbars, tracking protection, accelerators, for speeding up performance of websites or web-based applications. and then search providers. So we have the ability to go in and determine what we're going to allow users to install as add-ons, what we're going to block, etc. So, Shockwave, a great example, because of the heavy Flash-based websites that are still being developed. So, search options. So by default, instant search box found is, the Bing engine. Imagine that. Now, most of you change that to Google search. So we can go in and configure that at a corporate level to give everyone in that search bar default to Google search if we'd like. So we just go in, we can add a search provider. Notice which one's not listed. Oh, there it is right there. Yeah, so Bing, Google, Yahoo, if you're into that. So we just add the search provider. We configure it. And off we go. So, and then of course here, we can set the default search provider. So, Bing's still going to be there. Notice right now it's the default. We can go in and configure default. So accelerators, enable users to, email content, find it on a map, translate it into another language. So, again, add-ons, the question becomes, do we want, or does the corporate user even need accelerators? So, again, we can come in and configure what happens with the accelerator. Now, keep in mind, as more companies go to Office 365 and using Outlook Online, yes, we're going to have an accelerator for that because we're doing most of that within the browser. And of course, as we know, it's going to work best in IE. So again, accelerators, group policy, we can add, non-default accelerators. We can add default accelerators. We can turn off accelerators or restrict to those deployed through group policy. So again, we get to choose. And we definitely want to do this. We don't want to keep a browser open, for end users to do whatever they feel like doing. So, here's the group policy management console that we see. Another thing to look at, RSS feeds. People love to put things, read a bunch of stuff, especially when they're being paid for it, right? So if they're at work and there's an RSS feed that doesn't relate to, to their job, the question is, first of all, do they even need RSS feed? Is RSS being used maybe by competing companies that we're reading stuff from, or our vendors that might be putting out blogs that definitely do pertain to our business in some aspect? But if not, are we going to allow users to subscribe to RSS feeds? And again, we can configure that. So, subscribe, what are they going to subscribe to? Viewing RSS feeds. So, IE has the RSS reader that we can go into. Default feed settings. And again, the more of this we do either in a third-party management application or within group policy, preferably group policy, the more we can apply this to individual groups in our corporate network. So, this might be a thing that we do for most users, but, management has said, yes, I want this feature turned on. And of course, they get to choose. Now, I would remind you of one key element. It is not your responsibility as the IT professional to make these decisions. It is, however, your responsibility to make management aware of the potential for lost productivity, how you can secure that, how you can keep users from, from wasting their time at work. So a quick example, I worked at a company at the time that MySpace came out, became popular. At that point, there wasn't this granular control. We ended up just blocking the entire domain from the firewall. Prior to doing that, we gathered some information from a 24-hour period over all 3 shifts and found that because this was the biggest offender, because there's not a lot of people around, although it was the smallest number of people, the graveyard shift was utilizing about 60 hours. So amongst all the employees, 60 hours in one graveyard shift was spent surfing MySpace. Now the question became, yes, I didn't have the granular information to see was 60 people on for an hour during lunch, but the fact was they were using that. So you take that, you go to HR, you find out what the standard burden rate is. So what does it cost for us to have the average employee for an hour? Remember, it's not just what we pay them, it's the benefits, it's everything else. Go back to management and say, here's the potential for lost productivity. So printing in IE, getting back to this, so printing in IE, Internet Explorer, print stuff out of there. The question becomes, do we want users to be able to use our corporate printers? They find an article, they can't read it now. Gee, they want to take it home, they print it. What's the cost? So download manager, download and run selected file, download and save a file. What's going to happen when someone tries to download? The question is, are we even going to let them download? Okay. And here's why. A lot of times, like here's an example, they're going to download executables. And we've already talked about an executable policy, so hopefully that takes care of it. But this might be something that goes inside IE, a way that they can get around. I've even seen corporate users that will install, because they know we're blocking through our firewall, they'll install a VPN, a virtual private network, out to a third-party site on the web and basically browse through that, bypassing our entire network configuration. So by doing that, what happens if while they're doing that, they somehow download something, say, into their OneDrive in the cloud and then bring it down? So we can configure if we're going to allow people to download what we're going to allow them to download. So WebSockets, standard defining a new protocol. It enables internet clients and servers to exchange data immediately as it becomes available. So without the overhead of created by HTTP and transfer control protocol. So socket is an open connection, and you can hopefully see that this data interchange over this socket could potentially lead to a security vulnerability. So browser, primary application, most people use to access the internet. Yeah. As a result, and it's a major point of weakness for security, it is. So again, we need to do what we feel is appropriate, what management determines is appropriate. So again, we take this information to management. Management makes the decision. We get it in writing, and we implement it. So the other challenge, though, with browsing in the internet is a lot of companies now are engaging intranet sites, using the same browsers to actually conduct business, to issue applications out to employees that need them, to interact with software as a service, to interact with vendors, to interact with customers, all via web browsers. So an example of that would be, at one time I managed a small network for a mortgage company. They brought in a new application. It was all web-based. Although it ran internally, it was all web-based. And the reason it was web-based is because it also interacted with their website. So you could go out to their website, you could fill out a mortgage application. That information would be brought in locally to the local area network, and then they could manage your account and start shopping mortgages for you. So they needed that interactivity. Another thing it provided, we'll talk about this in just a minute, was the fact that even internal connections between the server and client were managed with SSL, which means even if somebody could get into the network, they couldn't essentially put in a man-in-the-middle attack, because we had certificates on the server and the client, and all of the connections were encrypted. Now, one of the things that meant is we did see a performance degradation when we first put up the client, and they determined it was best to upgrade some things to gigabit. Thankfully, computers, desktops, laptops have come with gigabit NICs for a long time. All we had to do was replace the gigabit switch. It just so happened it was at a time that we also were looking at a new phone system and needed power over Ethernet, so we just upgraded one switch to do both. So Mandatory integrity control, assigns various integrity access levels to processes running on the computer. Again, more opportunity for us to secure the computer, if you notice. So we'll look at medium user here. So privilege level is a user level. Processes granted limited access to the system, including write access to use a specific area, such as documents folder, etc. So again, we can get really granular as to how we secure our network. So protected mode, i.e. on Windows 8, protected mode by default. It's possible web-based applications designed to run on earlier versions might not run properly. The idea, again, is security, So once you've determined the exact source of your application's incompatibility, you can try to resolve the problem, move the site to the trusted site zone. So if something's not running, disable protected mode, not necessarily a recommended thing, or modify the application. So, protected mode incompatibilities, we can go in here, we can, change the level. Again, most of the time these problems are solved by adding the site to trusted sites. So there's something that the site's trying to do that we don't necessarily allow in protected mode. So turn on compatibility logging if we want to. Remember, with logging, those are things that you might want to turn on to do your testing and then turn off when you're done. So enhance protected mode, extension to protected mode, basically blocks unauthorized access to additional system resources, such as personal information, corporate network resources. Again, just additionally securing the network. Now realize this may be something that we want to do even with the internal sites. So here's where we can go in and enhance that. Are we going to just require SSL 3.0? Do we accept SSL 2.0? All very technical things. Make sure you research, make sure you test. In example, your test environment. So security zones provide different levels of access, specific applications, each of which has a different set of privileges. So, 4 zones. Well, restricted sites, pretty clear. Internet, local intranet, trusted sites. So local intranet being, those sites that are running locally. That might be a SharePoint site, for example. That might be a web-based application. Today, applications are being configured as web-based. Why? Because we tend to then want to push them out to the web or make them available to users via multiple devices. So if we know it's compatible, they can access it from their Android, from their tablet, not just from their desktop and laptop. So add a site to the security zone, we can do that. As you play with your server, you're going to see that Internet Explorer is hugely locked down on the server. Everything you do, it's going to ask you. You go out to Google on a server and it's going to say, are you going to want to trust this website? Are you sure? The reason being, you really should never be surfing the web from your server. If you need to do research, go ahead and do that from your client. Get the research, bring it back to the server, and do what you need to do. So, security zones, if we don't want the .NET framework enabled, if we're not doing XPS documents, all places that vulnerabilities can enter the computer. So there's definitely a lot to take on here, with Internet Explorer, all these changes, but understand the value of locking it down. Okay. So, Smart Screen Filter uses 3 technologies to identify potential phishing websites. You may have some intrusion detection. You may have, some third-party applications that you're using, a Barracuda server, for example. But, the Smart Screen Filter is a great start. So online lookup of phishing sites. So as people go to sites, it's going to look back at a database. Is this a site that's been tagged as a phishing site? Download sites, on-site analysis. Basically looking at the site and saying, hey, this may not be a site you want to go to. We can turn off Smart Screen Filter if we want, especially if we have a third party, so that, the same thing holds with, with the security mechanisms that Microsoft gives us. If we have our own security mechanisms, we don't need the two tying up the system. So now here's that one. So in private mode, enables you to surf internet without leaving any record of your activities. Any record of your activities on the client. So realize that we may have logging, back on our firewall that's providing the source IP inside our network and the URLs or the IP addresses normally where users are going. So, make users aware that just because they're doing it on a browser doesn't mean we can't see or log where they're going. But in private browsing can be a real issue. It may be something that we want to turn off. In your lab, you're going to go ahead and do that. So, filtering enables you to block specific providers, or all providers from gathering information on the user browsing habits. And then, of course, the history, etc., filtering. So administrators can configure in private mode settings within Windows 8, again, using group policy. So we can establish a threshold, we can track protection, prevent the computer from loading toolbars and browser objects and all that fun stuff that we can turn off in private browsing. Now, if you do a little research, you'll find that there's ways around it. So we may have to use group policy to configure multiple things. Turn off tracking protection, for example. Browse with certificates. So we're almost at the end here. Certificates, pretty important. Most people are using them today, even for simple things like email. I remember back in the day when your Ben Broadband email was not certificated. It was not HTTPS. It was just HTTP. And what that meant was that your username and password was going over the internet in plain text. If it happened to be going over an internet or network that I was running a packet sniffer on, I'm going to see that information. So a great example of this, just go out to your college email, and most likely you're going to see that there's a certificate installed there, using SSL protocol that most websites use when establishing secure connections with clients over the internet. Another great example, Facebook. I'm so darn old, I remember when Facebook did not use HTTPS. So, when browsing with certificates, we get an indicator. The HTTPS is an indicator. Of course, as you all know, never, ever, ever transfer any information that is confidential or private without making sure that that's an HTTPS. At that point, we can click on the certificate, we can go through the certificate path, we can find out who the certificate authority is, how long the certificate is valid. Some of you may have seen certificates that have expired, okay? And, thus you get that warning message that this may be an unsecure website, so they have to go back in and reissue the certificate. So as you can see, this certificate here, issued by VeriSign, which is, a very popular certificate authority, and that it's valid from the 2013 to 3/8 of 2015. So you'll look a little bit at certificates too. That's it for this basic lecture. I hope you guys are doing well. Take care.